Welcome everyone to our weekly meeting for the Software Supply Chain Security Working Group. I just went ahead and dropped one item I just wanted to cover right up front before we get too deep onto everything. I know we've got some folks who are new to the working group. We recently also added some folks external to GitLab who are participating in related features with the working group as well. So I just wanted to preface this with just an overview of some of the roles and responsibilities here. Apologies, I meant to link to the working group page, but I'll add that link here in just a minute. Anyway, so I'm taking the lead from a product perspective as the product DRI for the working group. And then we've got Brian Williams, who's taking the lead from an engineering perspective. So as DRIs, we are responsible for making an ultimate decision about what gets done and how. And then also we have a few others who are participating in the working group. We have a number of engineers from the govern team specifically who are contributing 80% of their time at a minimum to the working group. And then we have a number of others who are participating in various capacities as advisors or otherwise. Also, just to kind of recap some of where we landed last week, we ended up making some DRI assignments for specific features to do some refinement on some of those. So Brian's taking the lead on the back end and Daniel on the front end on defining that user experience for signed container registry images. I think it's Ollie. I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce his name, so my apologies if I'm saying it wrong. He's taking the work to evaluate overall where we're at with doing the signing itself. So putting together sort of that end-to-end architectural plan of how do we, not only do the signing, generate the tokens, do the signing, and then push that all the way through to verification. And then Aaron is doing a deep dive into whether or not we need an additional OIDC provider and figuring out how we can get the tokens that we need in order to do the signing. So just wanted to provide an overview of that. And are there any questions about those high-level assignments or the role of DRIs? I know DRI tends to be something that we do here in GitLab. Are there any questions about what it means to be a DRI?
Who was on the front end of signature verification? I missed that one. I'm trying to take notes in the doc.
Yeah, it's actually in our notes from the last meeting, but Daniel Pian is in charge of that.
Oh, I see. Okay, gotcha.
So yeah, I'll just drop a link too for those of you who are new to GitLab. I'll just drop a link.
I did it for you already.
To the, I meant to the DRI section of our handbook, so you can learn about how we handle DRIs here.
Okay.
All right, well, that's all I had. Marshall, if you want to take, you've got the next couple items.
Sure, yeah, before we go on to that one, I know that I think it was Darren had started like a blueprint a bit ago, but I think that preceded the working group. So is that, are we trying to see that artifact completed or
Yeah, so that's going to be part of the work that Ollie's doing, is going to be doing a spike, and then the results of that will feed back into that architectural blueprint. That was one of the outcomes of that spike issue that Ollie is responsible for.
Okay, so specifically related to the OIDC provider and whatever claims we would intend to support?
So Aaron is doing a deep dive specifically on the OIDC provider part, and Aaron is our DRI for that decision.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess we can move on to 2, which is kind of the same thing. Is anybody able to give an update on the status of the OIDC provider endpoint and whether we intend to pursue that for 16.0?
Can I just ask? Well, it's more of a clarification question here. I want to be totally transparent on this too. I've come in from the compliance group to help out, and from discussions I've had with Nate, who's on vacation this week, And based on the task that I picked up on doing a spike on signing, which I took up kind of under the impression that that would be a good opportunity to ramp up on some of the terminology and some of the technical details behind what we're working on. And it feels like that since I have done that, we have launched directly into this OIDC new issuer, I guess, problem that I think has a lot more facets to it than I think I am really adequately qualified to undertake, especially given the time sensitivity of this and how much of the future work that it's blocking. So I want to get that cleared up completely because I want to contribute here, but I don't feel like it's going to help us move forward if the onus is kind of on me to make that decision, because this is kind of well beyond my expertise at this point.
Yeah, okay. We're all kind of trying to do other research on how this stuff works. I think none of us understand it completely in depth yet. We're all still researching it. But if you would like, I can take over as the DRI for that issue. I have been researching how the signature verification works. That's been my primary focus for today. And I'm actually writing like a big, huge comment about how it works so that we can reference it later. And so that's probably gonna inform all the other decisions that we make about this, because I do think that in order to make an informed decision about the OIDC provider and other stuff that we're working on, I need to understand how this works first. So I've been doing my research on that. I expect to finish that in maybe a day or two. And then I'll be able to look at the OIDC provider again and see about making a decision on that.
Yeah, and like I think Billy has mentioned several times in a few different threads, like I think the reason why this issue is a bit convoluted is that like it's not technically a blocker, right? Like Folkio can sort of work around the problems, for lack of a better word. But I do think, like, I guess the most compelling argument that I have is that we're going to be making a bunch of breaking changes for 16.0 anyway, right? So it'd be nice to like scope all those, like have all those breaking changes occur right now, and then not have to worry about anything in the future. And there's been like a long time request to move the issuer for CI job tokens to a separate domain anyway, because folks that are running private instances that are behind a firewall or something, they can't use that feature for what it's intended for, which is like authenticating with external services, right? So if the OIDC endpoint is not publicly accessible, folks won't be able to use these new keyless signing features, right? So you'll run like cosign a test within CI, but then like when Folkio tries to hit the discovery endpoint and validate that the public keys match up, right, they won't be able to do that. And that's true with like AWS and GCP and all the sort of identity federation stuff. So I think it makes sense to like launch the keyless signing integration with standing up the new issuer on a separate domain as part of that. But if not, I think we need to think through what it looks like to migrate folks from a new path to a new domain in the future, right? Yeah, that's my thought on it.
The only point I would want to get all that is that it sounds like this is a topic that people in this domain have been already discussing for quite some time, and I think people in that domain need to be responsible for making that decision. I'm happy to sit in on those discussions, but I don't think it's helpful to have like someone external to that that's already been ongoing have to make a decision, especially when and another thing, when we talk about time sensitivity too, it wasn't clear to me in context like what kind of time frames we were looking at, but there was a lot of kind of requests for updates, and I was really in position to give those. Just something to think about moving forward.
Yeah, thanks for being transparent. No way.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I feel like we've been having on the topic of like deprecating and removing this stuff in 16.0. Unless that's a decision that we really need to make in our working group, it seems like that's a better decision for Dove's team to make and the pipeline execution team. Is that
Yeah,
something that we would even fall on us?
I also think it's too late to add more breaking changes to 16.0 at this point because it's going to start in a week or two. But I know that this feature is alpha, and technically we could break it whenever we want. But I really don't want to do it without giving any notice, alpha or not, because I feel like that's a good way to lose trust from customers.
Yeah, I mean, like, to be clear, the issuer is embedded in the JWT, right? So unless you're like hard coded against the current issuer endpoint, which I think is just gitlab.com, it's not really a breaking change in that sense. Folks would still be able to, like, all the tooling would automatically validate. I'm not sure what all folks are using that JWT for today. But yeah, like you said, the ID tokens keyword in CIYAML is in alpha, right? And like, I think most of the tooling is integrated programmatically, so changing the issuer by itself is not a breaking change. I just meant that like there's definitely other breaking changes, like removing the old environment variables, right? And potentially like we're talking about changing the claims that are embedded into the JWT, right? So if we remove some old ones or rename anything, those would also be breaking changes. But I don't think that changing the issuer itself is necessarily a breaking change, because like all the metadata that you need to validate that token is still embedded in the token itself. Does that make sense?
So I would actually disagree there. I know for a lot of cases for Sigstore and cosign, we actively encourage people to say like when you're verifying policies to say which issuer it's coming from, because we sort of see this problem all the time where the issuer, what GitHub as an issuer says is okay may be different than what Google says as an issuer is okay. This pops up a lot for like, how do you know someone has control over an email address? So we do tend to encourage people to pin to specific issuers. So I would expect that to be a breaking change. I don't think that's a showstopper.
To clarify, you mean like you would consider it a breaking change after we roll out the keyless signing integration, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was saying in that one comment, I can pull up the link. If we do move forward with the keyless with the current issuer, like I think that's totally fine. We would just basically treat that whatever the new issuer endpoint as a completely distinct entity, and then it would just be on sort of GitLab's responsibility for like how do you shepherd users from the old endpoint to the new endpoint, and what does that transition look like, and how do users know which one to use for their validation, stuff like that.
But there's nothing. All the nothing in the tool chain needs to go back and consult the old issuer, the old OIDC issuer endpoint to verify things that have already been signed, right? because those signatures just exist in the transparency log and don't need to be revalidated against the OIDC provider
Correct.
in any way, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's really just the policies and which
Yep.
one you're looking at. Okay.
All right, well, in any case, I'm fine with the plan to have Brian take over as DRI for this. I think that's totally fine. And it's sounds like it'll be a couple days before you're able to start in, but I think that's okay. I think that's a smart move to just make sure we make a good decision here. I know there's time pressure, but it's better to make the right decision than
Yeah,
to rush
something
it.
I just thought of, Brian, like an option that we have here is in order to limit the impact, like I assumed that I think DOF has already deprecated like the old CI job JDT and CI job JDT v2, and those are on the, I don't think they're scheduled for removal yet, but like they're already deprecated. So I think that's the intent. But if we're worried about breaking changes to that stuff, which could be important because I think our Vault integration hinges on that. The new issuer could just be scoped to JDTs that are generated by the new ID token keyword, I think. So you could leave everything else in place and just stand up a new issuer that is specifically only used when you're generating tokens with the ID token keyword. And that would be sufficient, right? So that's just another option. We want to limit the scope of the breaking changes, or just limit the scope of the changes.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should definitely check with Dove about the status of those two different JWT variables. Because it is technically his he technically owns that part of the product, and we shouldn't make like a deprecation decision without his input.
Yeah, I agree. And then Brian, I think you probably have enough refined, if you're finishing out that refinement, Aaron, I don't know what you want to move over to, but I would assume if you wanted to pick up some of those back-end issues on the user experience for signed container registry images, I think where Brian's got those pretty well refined, you might be able to just pick up where he's left off there.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great.
Great. All right, so I think sounds like that's pretty much it for number 2. Marshall, you want to take number 3?
Yeah, I was hoping Ollie would be around to discuss this stuff a little bit. I can chat with him about it offline later. I think the biggest open question on the aligning with the Folkio spec is like what we're gonna do about one of the claims is that GitHub supports his runner environment, which is intended to be something like platform hosted versus self-hosted, right? And I think everybody understands the context from the linked PR, but basically like we need some way to identify like managed runners versus unmanaged runners, which isn't really something that we indicate explicitly anywhere in the interface today, as far as I know. I think the only way that you know that you're running on like a managed runner is just based on the runner description currently. And that runner description is just like a plain text value. So not really something that's suitable for embedding into a JDT claim at the moment.
Yeah, we could totally have like a platform hosted true false thing that's only true on GitLab.com if it's like a shared runner. I think it would be pretty simple to do that, and that sounds like nice and boring. We don't need to have something complex that's like.
Yeah, so I think like what I was missing from the initial discussion is like, again, like Folkio can sort of like remap our tokens into other things, right? So I don't know whether it makes more sense to just include some Boolean value like that in the like claims that we generate, or like have something that's like more specific that they could then use to map into that claim, right? So like I think Ali was looking at like the runner descriptions for our shared runners that have a nice like URI associated with them that indicates the environment that they're running in. If that were something that were standardized across all runners, that would be something that Folkio could hook into and be like, okay, well, this one has the host name of like runnermanager.gitlab.com. And so we know that that's a platform hosted shared runner. But yeah, I'm just trying to think of a way that we can answer the question easily for now, but it's still be forward compatible with changes that we might want to make in the future. You know what I mean? Because like I think I know like Darren has talked to me about us potentially supporting like managed runner fleets on .com that like would be dedicated to a particular customer, but would still be considered managed, right? So it may not be enough in the future to just know that it's a shared runner in terms of how we currently define what a shared runner is. Does that make sense? But we can continue to hash that out in the issues if nobody has any insight at the moment.
Yeah, I don't have like a definitive answer, because I think what it really comes down to is like, what do you want users to be writing policy against? And if the Boolean true false is sort of all the knobs you want to give them, then like, great, we can do that. If we do want to have more of the like, oh, what type of runner pool, where is it running, who has access, then yeah, we probably want some more details there.
If
Yeah.
we send you a Boolean claim value for now, well, I guess if we're sending across any claim value, like we have to support that on our end indefinitely. Okay, yeah, we'll just have to think about it a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay, and then I don't see a name by number 4, so I'm not sure who's taking that. Looks like
I could take this one.
Billy, that might be yours.
Yeah, I'm doing most of this work anyway. Yeah, so I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. Hi, I'm Billy. I work over at ChainGuard. You might have seen me on a few other open source projects. I contribute a lot to Sigstore, Tecton, GitSign. Yeah, so happy to be working with y'all, and yeah, I'm excited to make this happen. So yeah, we have a bunch of stuff that's sort of in flight already. So support for arbitrary ID tokens, we landed in cosign and getsign. So once the Fulcio changes are in, we should be able to start picking up the GitLab tokens basically as soon as possible, which is exciting. PR is out for Sigstore.js as well, which Brian from GitHub did approve, but needs to go through another cycle. That's fine. Yeah, and then beyond that, I've started poking around the NPM CLI stuff. Changes look fairly straightforward. I think, again, some of this does depend on the Fulcio changes. I know with the GitHub Actions workers, there's definitely a push for only using authenticated data, so data that was present in the JWT. So yeah, I'd like to follow suit as well for any GitLab data as well. So things like commit SHA, things like, you know, where the file's coming from. I think we've already covered most of it in the other issues, but getting those in place and have those be upstream to Fulcio and start publishing those will probably be a blocker there. But otherwise, I think everything looks good for the most part so far. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Let me share my screen real quick. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things that Billy was talking about for anybody that may be watching the recording async or doesn't have the context. can you see my screen? Do you see the SigStor.js somewhere?
Yep.
Yep.
So the way this is going to work in the short term, like this is sort of like a stopgap until we can have like integrated ambient credential detection. So I think another issue that Ali was on was standing up the separate API endpoint where you could request an ID token rather than having to use the ID tokens keyword at all. But in the meantime, basically what Billy's done is establish a convention where if you inject an ID token that is named SigStor ID token, all the tooling, get sign and cosign, will respect that automatically, right? So in the future, like the only thing that would change once we actually support ambient credential detection, have this new API endpoint, is that these lines would go away and everything would still work as is. But I think this is a really nice approach because like it's convention based, but it's not anything that depends on GitLab specific conventions. It's something that will generally work in a lot of contexts.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. I think we are at time. It looks like we pretty well addressed. I know there are some other open questions there. It looks like we've addressed most of those async, and we can follow up with the rest of those async since we're a couple minutes over already. But
Yeah,
thanks, everyone, for joining today.
Other folks are free to drop, but there are a couple open questions that I want to run by Billy real quick. Can we keep the recording going, Sam, or is it going to stop as soon as you drop?
I can pass it off to someone else, I think. I'll try to stay on if I can, just in case.
Okay. So open questions that I think you had, Billy, right, are related to the spec for GitLab provenance. Does that answer your question there? I pointed to the struct that we are using to construct it right now.
Yeah, that is mostly helpful. Are you guys doing anything specific with the predicate? I know that ends up being like the most customized part quite a lot.
Let me look back at it because it's been a while since.
So I think right now we're actually trying to remember as well. Pull this up.
What do you mean by doing anything with the predicate? Like is
So-
formatting it in a certain way?
Yeah, so typically what we see for other predicates for like GitHub Actions or Tecton is that CI systems will actually embed the config spec into the predicate itself.
Mm-hmm.
And how that format looks can vary per provider, and Salsa was intentionally written to be flexible in that way. So if all we're doing is just using the standard like Salsa like in toto predicate fields, that's easy enough. But if we're doing something sort of more involved, basically what I'm trying to get at is like I want to try to mirror the predicate that we're using, that GitLab is using elsewhere for npm. So if there's like any like live examples or anything like that you can point me to, that'd be super helpful for me to base the npm stuff off of.
Yeah, so I just dropped an example. There's a screenshot. Also, if you want to test this out in a GitLab project, it's extremely easy.
Okay.
All you have to do, I'll drop this in the notes document as well, but all you have to do is create a .gitlab.ci.yaml file in a project, and it's a very, very short file, and it'll produce the attestation for you. So I'll drop that in as well, and once I format it better.
And Sam, do you know, does this get written to a file at the start of the job, or is it all done at the end?
I couldn't say for certain. I'm pretty sure it happens at the end though, but I could be wrong on that. We'd have to ask. I think it was Grigori implemented it.
Because like Billy, I'm wondering like how if we were to continue to do provenance generation within the runner, how do we connect that to client tooling like npm? I'm thinking an obvious way is like it just dumps the JSON file somewhere and sets an environment variable indicating where that file is, and then client tooling can just like read it in, provide an attestation and send it off. But I don't know if there's much more
That-
value in doing it that way.
Yeah, so that would be nice. We can't do that though, because there's no guarantee that that file hasn't been tampered with from like when it was written to when the attester is reading it. So that's why for like the NPM stuff, like there's a desire to only use values generated like materials and config source and stuff like that. Like anything that's sort of identifying information should always be authenticated and coming from the JOT directly. Ideally, in most cases.
Let me look. I provided a couple links below on B for like how NPM is doing it currently.
Yes, yeah, they're currently using the environment variables. Though there is an issue open in the NPM beta issue tracker. I'm not sure if you have access to that. Though I can get you access if you want. That basically says like, hey, we should stop doing this and we should use authenticated provenance only, or authenticated data only.
Okay.
And yeah, this would have to be generated at the end after the job is finished running, because we're looking at the output, like the build artifact that's produced as a result of the job. And as part of that attestation, we're including a SHA hash of the file. We couldn't get that if we were running it at the beginning of the job. So we have to let the job complete first so that we can get all of the output and certify like the SHA hash of that output, for example.
Oh, I see. Okay. So like we were actually trying to provide not just the provenance, but like an attestation.
Yeah, we're
How do we know-
producing a SALSA 2 compliant attestation at the moment.
Is it for a particular artifact that gets output, or like all of them?
We do it for all job artifacts. If you have that variable set to true, we do it for all artifacts.
Okay, makes sense.
And that's the same thing that we want to do with the signing. So we just want to sign all of these attestations that we're producing just by default, because it never hurts to generate an attestation or sign something unnecessarily, other than I guess it adds a small amount of additional CI minutes, but otherwise, like, it's not doing any harm to generate attestation and sign something if it doesn't need it. So we just want to do that by default for everything.
Yeah. I don't know how folks will connect the artifacts that are produced from a job to like published artifacts somewhere, right? So like in the case of NPM, let's say that you build your NPM package, right? And then I guess you could output it as a tarball and have it get signed automatically, but like I don't see any way to like close, like you'd have to then have a separate job that like downloads that tarball and publishes it along with like the attestation, which I think would put you in the same position that you're in initially, which is that you can't really verify where that artifact or signature came from, or that it well,
I would expect that you should be able to verify the signature, and the signature signs the artifact, or sorry, the signature signs the attestation, and the attestation has a checksum of the build artifact itself. And so by doing that, you're able to certify that neither the attestation nor the build artifact has changed, like the NPM package, you know, certify that that has not changed from the time that it was signed. So it does mean that you would need to push both the signature and the package up to a registry. And then to do verification, you would need to examine that signature as well as the attestation. So those three things have to go together, right? The package, the attestation, and the signature.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're planning to build like natively into GitLab, so that if you push those three things into, say, a container registry, then you get that for your container image verified in the UI, and same thing with the package registry as well.
Yeah, everything after the fact makes sense. I just, Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's going to be about the same amount of effort to take artifacts that were pushed and then upload them where you want them to be, right? Like in the case of a container or a container image or an npm package. So I just don't see how folks are going to connect this to the end state. Like I get what you're saying, and I think it makes sense. I just don't see, like, I'm having trouble visualizing how folks would actually use it.
I'll also throw in another anecdote. So this is a similar problem that we have on another open source project, Tecton Chains, where we do sort of out of band signing for artifacts being produced by Tecton pipelines. A strategy that we employ a lot is basically combining both signatures running on the worker itself with signatures coming from the trusted control plane. And so you can actually like use both in tandem, right? You can say like, oh, hey, I'm going to, when I npm publish, I'm going to sign this artifact with the identity of the build job itself. And then I'm also going to sign it with some sort of other attester for the pipeline that's running in the trusted control plane. And it's really the combination of both signatures that really grants that trust. And you can actually split that responsibility. So like, the trusted control plane doesn't necessarily need to know about all of the inputs and outputs and stuff like that. All it needs to know is really about what was the output artifact hash. And then you can sort of have that summary attestation at the control plane level. And then you can reference the details at the builder level as well. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. And it might be something we can apply here as well.
I didn't totally follow that, Billy, but it sounded really good.
I can send you some links.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot that Tecton Change sort of behaves similarly. In the case of container images, am I remembering correctly that like you rely on the user to like set some environment variable that indicates the images that were pushed, and then you like the Tecton Chains component looks at it that way?
Yeah, we have a few different mechanisms to do it. You can set a results. You can set. There's also some work going on to make it more first class in the API for like what provenance are inputs and outputs and stuff like that. Yeah, Chains just basically looks for all of them. Like what are the n different ways you can say like, hey, I produced this image, and then it tries to go and sign that.
Mm-hmm. But it's like the image is pushed from the builder, right? And then separately, like you define, hey, I pushed this image, right? So
correct.
Okay, yeah. Does that make sense, Sam? Like that's another way to do it. Instead of like outputting the artifact directly from the job, you can just have some way to tell us that you pushed this artifact somewhere, whether it's npm or a container registry or something, and then we can layer in the automatic signing on top of that way potentially. That way you don't have to like. That way we don't force users into like having to output something like a container image as an artifact, get that uploaded, and then separately download it and push it to a registry.
Yeah, so I mean, we haven't really crossed that bridge. I think where you're talking, Marshall, is like still a few weeks ahead of where our engineers are at right now. So the end state is that if you're building a container image, we would want to generate an attestation for that and sign it. And we wouldn't want to force you to output that as a build artifact in order to make that possible. Like we've started with generating attestations for build artifacts just to get started. But eventually we would also want to generate attestations just like when we see a Docker build command, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I think we just haven't crossed that bridge yet. That's still a little ways out to figure out the details. You're getting into implementation details that our engineers will cover when they get to their research spikes.
Cool. That's all I had.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Have a good week.